PhD in religion at Vanderbilt University. So that brings me here. Along the way, I've been a United Methodist minister, served as pastor of Old National United Methodist Church, and one of my greatest joys was serving as the university chaplain at Clark Atlanta University for several years. And so once I left Clark Atlanta University, I returned here again to Nashville and took a faculty position at Vanderbilt.
And so in a real sense, you've been involved with the church one way or the other, not only all of your life, but it seems that many members of your family were also involved with the church for all of, and I would imagine for a long time it has been the Methodist Church. Would that be a fair assumption in reference to that?
It has been. It has been. Growing up, I remember sitting, in the pew listening to my grandfather preach, and he knew each member by their names, their faces, and their stories. And every Sunday, he'd find a way to integrate their stories and their hearts and minds with a word from the Lord and uplift the people who had often been downtrodden by the world. And so that was the beginning of my introduction to African American biblical interpretation. It was sitting by my grandfather and watching him deal with what was going on around him, what was the ways that the community was being assaulted in the 50s and 60s, and hearing those stories about how he dealt with how he dealt with not only the church, but how he empowered the church to deal with the world. And later on, as I would sit with him in these late 70s and early 80s, I learned the power of what it meant to be that kind of a pastor.
Very good. And so let's look at some of the areas dealing with African Americans and biblical interpretation. I know that there are so many parallels in terms of the African story and the Bible that we've heard many of them time and time again, but from a professional and from a scholastic point of view, talk about it from that point of view.
Well, I think African Americans, interestingly enough, from the beginning of our journey here in the Americas, have gravitated toward the Exodus story. And that's because there's so many easy parallels between the Exodus story and the African American experience in bondage. The themes of bondage and slavery easily transfer to the African American experience in the United States, and figures like Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth and Frederick Douglass and so many others are often signified with the identity of Moses. And African Americans have found themselves reading the Bible in what we call a figurative way. That is, to take the Bible and look at it not only historically, but to understand that these historical themes find their way into the present and tell us about the future. So we read our own story through these themes, and so figuratively we live into the text.
Very good. So what we'll do, we'll take our first commercial break, and then we'll come back and we'll have 8 minutes, and we'll allow you to continue this discussion. And we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break.